Hey everybody. So just before we begin here, I'm just going to spend about 30 seconds introducing how the interview will work today. I do have scripted questions for our guest, which I will go through first, and then we will have time at the end to ask viewer questions, and I will verbally introduce when that will come around. Without further ado, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, respective of where you are in the world. My name is Mark Allard-Will, and I'll be your host today. But as you can see, I am not alone. I'm joined all the way from the UK by the very talented author, Oli Jacobs. Oli, can I ask you to introduce both yourself and your work, please?
You can indeed, as you say. I am Oli Jacobs. I am a UK-based indie author of various genres, mostly horror and comedy. Probably best known for the Kirk Sandblaster series of sci-fi comedies and the Filmic Cut series of short story collections. And my latest book, which is out now, is Wilthaven, which is probably best described as Midsummer Murders as written by H.P. Lovecraft.
Wonderful, thank you. So you're a big proponent of self-publishing,
Mm-hmm.
and you've managed to build up a good network of readers through self-publishing, of course. So if we just imagine that there are some new readers watching, oh sorry, new writers watching today, what advice would you give to them to begin building up their reader base?
Well, I mean, hopefully there are some new readers today because, as any indie author will tell you, they need the sales. But I've done a few talks on self-publishing for like new writers. I mean, I find it's a very solid base to start. Because obviously the market nowadays is very saturated, I think, and you're finding a lot more risks not being taken by main presses. It's slightly more open with small presses, but for me, self-publishing kind of gives you that autonomy and control over your work. So I think for new writers, you're always going to be that case of, every book is your baby, so you want to make sure that you're getting the best for it. And in self-publishing, it gives you that kind of control. It gives you that kind of authority, and also it gives you the chance to get your work out there. I think one of the main writer banes, as it were, and that I've experienced myself, is the writers are almost afraid to get their work out there because they want to get it perfect. So you have rewrites upon rewrites upon rewrites, and you have people saying, "Oh, I've been working on my book for like 3, 5, 10 years." And I mean, while that's admirable, I like I say, I think at some point you've literally got to push out the nest. So there's a massive community out there of indie authors and also indie reviewers. Like I say, book blogs are a huge thing now. With social media, you end up linking with various people in both in like publishing and in various ways, like artwork, beta readers. Almost every aspect there is a community out there. So I would say just dive in and just make sure to tread water, I guess.
Yeah, and it touches upon what Dane said in the last interview that we had here with Dane Cobain, where he
mm.
said that finished work is better than unfinished. So, in other
Mm.
words, you can aim for perfection, but you'll never get there. So,
I
just
mean, sorry, I was going to say, I mean, you ask any writer if they're happy with the final draft, as it were, and I doubt you would find one. Every writer is kind of like, I could have done that better, I could have done that better. I mean, with self-publishing as well, I mean, I've seen so many errors in proper books, as it were, where there's like a spelling error or there's a continuity error or something like that. Um, with self-publishing, I found that if that error does exist, I then have the control to re-edit it and basically fix it, which is easier on a digital platform because then it updates it. Obviously, you can't go around people's houses and edit the paperbacks that they've got. And believe me, I've tried, um, unsuccessfully, I should add. The charges are pending.
So one of your longest running series to date is Kirk Sandblaster, and
Hmm.
it's the way that I like to imagine it is if you take a fictionalized version of Captain Kirk and place him down in the dry-witted, sarcastic universe full of missteps and flawed systems, with a sense of humor that is reminiscent of both Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. What were your main inspirations when beginning this series?
Well, it's funny. It's funny that you mention Captain Kirk because despite the name Kirk Sandblaster, he was not on my mind when I came up with the character. I was thinking more of the trope of the space cowboy. So, like Han Solo's, specifically, he was the main influence, and I just kind of thought like almost like a dumber Han Solo, but some like dumber in terms of common sense, not intelligence. But then obviously a few people, such as you've just pointed out now, mentioned the Captain Kirk thing, and then obviously there's aspects of that. Um, Again, I don't see the Kirk Sandblaster books as sci-fi. They're comedies that happen to be set in space. I mean, you look at the Kirk Sandblaster books, and it's just it's ridiculousness that is very much inspired by the world as well. So yeah, you do take this cocksure rogue space person and then have them like enter in like game shows that are based on the Hunger Games, or they have to solve the economy or face deadly robots and take part in, and it's all these kind of like almost serious topic, but it's like almost satirical in taking the Mickey out of them. Um, like I say, Tetrageddon is one of my favourite ones in it because it deals with economics and it actually starts with kind of like, right, let's talk finances. Oh my god, now you're bored. No, come back. And the whole narrator doing that. But yeah, I mean, I would probably again in the back of my mind, I have probably subtle influences. So Terry Pratchett, Douglas Adams are huge influences in terms of that universe, and it's just utilizing that British dry humor that I seem to possess. So
That's fantastic. And as a reader, I can see the Terry Pratchett connection where Terry Pratchett obviously pokes fun at things that he views as being flawed in the real world, like the postal
mm,
system, how tourism is designed to take money from tourists, that kind of thing.
mm.
And it's so I can see that kind of comedy of satirizing flawed systems of the world. So that's awesome. Yeah.
It's just yeah, it's just kind of taking those systems and then like applying them to scientific phlebonium, I think is what they call the trope. As like the Montague Santiago thing, I pastiche the whole idea of award ceremonies and how pompous they are. I think there's one scene that I do like where they start singing a song that lasts hours and it's terrible. And but again, award ceremonies have these moments where it's like, yeah, sing a song to celebrate what we're doing. And you're like, just get to the awards. So yeah, I like kind of like taking taking the mick, as it were, out of certain institutions. Not obviously not just in Kirk Sandblaster in all my work, but yeah, Kirk is a very um, it's a I'm able to do that
Awesome.
there.
So following on from that, a dry, almost surgical sense of humor runs through your books, even when they're the darkest of horrors, and it's hilarious, without detracting from the drama or tension of the book it finds itself in. What's your secret to pulling off good comic relief without distracting from story development?
Well, I mean personally, I have a very natural sense of humour that some would say, you know, I don't like. I don't like. I never like saying I'm funny because you will always have that dissenting voice going, "Well, you're not funny." It's like, oh, for God's sake, just let nice things happen. But I mean, I have a natural, as you can tell when you've spoken to me, I have a natural cadence when it comes to just bringing in humour. And I mean, it's interesting what you say with like inputting the dark humor into like my horrors because I've said a lot like in articles and stuff like that, that I find basically horror and comedy are the same. And you'll find a lot of writers who will say the same thing. Horror and comedy are exactly the same methodology. It's all about setup and punchline. So with horror, you're building up the scene, you're building up the scene, you're building up the scene, and then scare. And with a joke, you're building up the scene, building up the scene, building up the scene, joke. Um, I think of one example. Like one example, I was thinking of when I knew like this question was coming. Spoiler alert. Was you kind of have the scene of the young girl in the house. She's all alone. It's very dark, and then the phone rings. And she picks it up and she's like, "Hello." It's like, "I know you're in there," and the lights go out. And suddenly she's panicking, and they just crash to the window, and you see the shadow of a maniac comes in. He's got a knife, and he chases her, and it's your typical slash thing, and then he catches her, holds her down, and is about to strike with the knife, and he goes, "Wait, is this number 42? No, this is number 40. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. I've got the wrong address. Oh, this is embarrassing. Oh my, and again, that's where you can kind of insert comedy, and then of course from there you realise he's actually in the portal to hell, and she starts melting and stealing his soul. But it's effectively the same genre, and that's what I like about it. I've taken my enjoyment of stand-up comedy, of like building up the story and then hitting you with something, and applying that both to comedy and horror.
That's wonderful. That's a really great way of thinking about it that I never would have thought of, to be honest with you. Um, so you've worked with graphic designers and comic book artists for book covers for various books of yours, including The Children of Little Flopping and the aforementioned Kirk Sandblaster series, to create real attention-grabbing covers. What advice would you give to new writers looking to put together a solidly designed book for market?
Find an artist who shares your vision to an extent, but has their own particular style. I mean, I've been lucky in I've found two people, CM Carter, who did a lot of my earlier work, and Allard-Will, who I don't know if you're familiar with. She's a very good graphic novelist. Did something called, I think I've got like Saskatchewan, which is what I'm wearing now, and Arcade. I can't remember who wrote that, but some English expat. But she's also done stuff like Look Straight Ahead and Dash It Glory. And both those artists have their own distinct style that I felt connected with what I wanted to project, and so that is what I'd say to inspiring authors is, first of all, don't do it yourself, because you have a biased viewpoint and it will be terrible, guaranteed. Unless you are an actual artist, and then while you write books, do graphic novels. Use your talents. But obviously, look for other indie artists. If you're going straight for the people who have got like thousands and millions of followers, they're probably not going to do spec work for you because they're doing loads of other stuff. But just look for artists you like. Like there's a few on Twitter that I follow that I'd absolutely love to work with. Ian Laurie, John Cullen, Rachel Smith. But yeah, it's all about finding somebody who not just shares your viewpoint, but also has a professional style as well. So, like I say, CM Carter and Allard-Will, complete professionals when it comes to art and design as well. They're perfect partners for me when it comes to putting my work out there and visually representing them.
Wonderful, thank you. One thing that we should touch upon in this interview is the Bureau of Paranormal Discoveries. So this is a universe that has been begun across a series of your books, begun with The Children of Little Flopping, a book that I really enjoyed. And it's now continued into your latest book, Wilthaven. So I'm just wondering what you could tell us about this new book, Wilthaven.
Well, Wilthaven, funny enough, Children of Little Flopping came from Wilthaven. So Wilthaven is about the titular small English town that exists in a dimension different to ours and is discovered by the Bureau for Paranormal Discoveries, the BPD. They discover it through various artifacts that somehow slip into our world. So, like news stories that don't fit, like the area they're from, or posters advertising things that never happened. So, like the basic anomalies, and then slowly the book is presented as a file. So it's almost like a short story collection in that you have various little documents. So you have police reports, transcripts of radio shows, TV shows, transcripts of posters, news articles, and then you also have the operation details from the BPD where they carried out an operation. I'm massively inspired by the work of the SCP Foundation, which is an online community who do horror in a very administrative way, and they are brilliant. I would recommend them to anybody. Also, I love mundane horror. I love that kind of idea of, and you kind of get that in Children of Little Thwopping, where horror is dealt with in such a shrug way. It's just kind of it's done in, it's normalized almost. So again, Wilthaven has this. You have like meeting minutes of the Wilthaven Council where they're kind of discussing opening up a bread shop, dealing with the upcoming harvest festivals, and also going over who's been kidnapped in the middle of the night and sacrificed to a demon god. So yeah, I mean, it's a universe that it's kind of been born out of the fact that I like when things have a shared universe. It's something that I noted and got really into with Stephen King. Like, all his work is interconnected, and I was going to do it another way, but that way didn't really work. So the BPD have been kind of inserted as basically, like I say, this government agency who deal effectively with different paranormal dimensions when they pop up. I think they actually first cameoed. Oh God, I'm trying to remember. I think it's Film It Cuts 5, which is Suplex Sounds of the 70s, where they turn up in a story basically called P22067, which deals with a unit basically going to this other dimension and it all going horribly wrong. But yeah, I mean, like I say, Children of Little Thwopping, funnily enough, and this kind of says a lot about my approach to work. Originally, it was just going to be just another file where they were kind of they found this book and they put little excerpts of it and studied them. And I kind of thought to myself, if I'm going to do excerpts, I'm going to need to know what happens in the story in the middle of it. So I just ended up writing the book and then publishing it.
Fantastic. And so we'll open it up for viewer questions now, but while you're typing those out, I will just let everyone know that there is a link to Ollie's website in the description of this live video where you can find more information on Wilthaven and all of his other books, and links there as well. So please do go and support Ollie and check out his work. So while we're waiting for viewer questions to come through, you did send me some questions here from friends of yours as well.
Yes, I reached out to a few friends and kind of said, look, does anybody have any questions, just because I'm doing this interview? And the response was very good. So I think I remember one question was about how much wood. I don't know if you have that one written down, where somebody asked how much wood would a wood chipper chop if a wood chopper could chop wood, which the answer to that obviously is none, because he'd be too busy reading Oli Jacobs books to chop any wood, such as Wilthaven, Bad Sandwich, Children of Little Thwopping, and anyway.
So the first one that I've got here is from Dane Cobain. I'd like to know where the title.
I know him.
I'd like to know where the title "Film It Cuts" comes from, and whether you're a plotter, pantser, or plantser. Also, what have you been working on during isolation?
Good question. So first one, Film It Cuts. It comes from when I was interested in filming. filmmaking rather, which is what I originally studied at university. I kind of I described some of the things as filmic, and that became like I decided to adopt that as a brand name, as it were. So you had the filmic type place, and then from that came I wrote tons of scripts that never came to fruition. So instead, I thought, well, I'm going to turn these scripts into stories or filmic cuts, so like cuts of meat almost from the bigger animal. So these were little cuts that kind of never made it. So yeah, that's where filmic cuts came from, and it's just kind of stuck ever since. In terms of whether I'm a plotter, a planner, or a pantser, I am a hardcore plotter. I'm brutally like intricate with how I plot a book. I will always I will have the vague story, and then I will break that story down into beats, and then I'll break those beats down into chapter beats, and then I'll break those chapter beats into beats within that chapter, and then I will break that down into the main components, and then that's how basically how the story is written. And it's all I always like to know what happens beginning, middle, and end. That has to be complete for me, otherwise I can't write it. I get lost. But that's not to say things don't change while I'm writing it. Like whole plot lines have been deleted because the story's gone in one direction while I'm writing it. So definitely a plotter. The final question, what I've been working on during this wonderful lockdown, obviously Wilthaven, doing the edit on that, making sure that it was all spit and polished for publication. And at the moment, I'm actually editing the second in my Mr. Blank series. So I had the first book come out a few years ago, Wrapped Up in Nothing. So it's about a guy who wakes up in the desert, he's been left for dead, and he goes on a rampage of revenge. The second book, I found this out when I started editing it and basically completely rewriting it. I first wrote it in 2016, so it's been a nice 4-year gap since first writing it that I'm kind of like, oh, okay, looking at this with fresh eyes, and oh my god, I recently rewrote a whole chapter, so that's my work at the moment.
Awesome. And then we have a question from Michael J. Ritchie. Which book by another author do you wish you had written?
Oh, um, I tell you what, I will take one from a couple of my favourite authors. So Stephen King, absolutely love Stephen King. The Stand, because that is such a good book, and I think that is the baseline for all like modern post-apocalyptic fiction. I think and it's very prevalent, prescient of these times. So massive, basically, if you haven't read The Stand, massive virus breaks out and kills most of the world. So that's a nice, joyous read to do in these times. Also, At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, because it's such a beautifully put together, tense story of like the unknown and stuff like that. I mean, anybody who knows me as well knows I'm a big fan of The Thing, so any sort of horror and paranoia that takes place in cold areas is usually appealing to me. But yeah, those would be the two that jump out immediately.
Fantastic. And Stuart Ashton asks, if all your characters had a fight, who would win?
Well, here's the thing. It's like, who do you put your money on? Do you put your money on Kirk Sandblaster because he's cunning, he's strategic, and he's got that little bit of luck. Then you've got Zla, who's a giant, two-headed, four-armed bulk of an alien. Actually, I shouldn't say alien because that's construed as racist in the Kirk Sandblaster universe. So, being, or Zarian, which isn't technically. Then you have Mr. Blank, who, like I say, he's been left for dead, but he's like he's got really good combat skills, really aggressive stuff like that. But I'm actually going to go with a suggestion that probably only hardcore fans of mine would probably know, which is Larry from the short story Happy as Larry, which I think is from Filmic Cuts 2, Luchador Monkey Crisis. Simply because in the story he's blessed with good luck. and bad luck that happens to those around him. So by that virtue, nobody could beat him in a fight because his good luck would counteract it, and they'd end up having pianos fall on them or something.
That's awesome. So we got one question that's really relevant to what's going on right now from Stephen Colgan.
Oh yeah.
How does the lockdown affect your writing? And as someone who deals with anxiety on a daily basis, does your writing help you or not?
The writing does help during the lockdown, and it has affected my writing in the fact that I've got more time to do it. Something that he obviously touched upon in his question, and if those people who know my work and know me know, I suffer with depression and anxiety quite severely, and the writing does help that. It kind of like gives you a vent almost to kind of put all these things that are going on in your head into another avenue rather than have it all kind of messed up in there. So obviously with the lockdown there is a lot of isolation, there is a lot of introspection, but through writing I can then take that introspection and put it into something creative rather than have it spin around in my mind. So it's actually I've enjoyed the lockdown, which is probably the not something most people would say, but yeah.
I think for creative people, I think a few people would probably join me in saying this, that it's given us kind of the gift of time, really, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Suddenly you've got all this free time to indulge in your creative passion. Suddenly you've got time to write that novel, time to make that film, or like what you're doing with the quarantine interviews.
Yeah.
Fantastic way to kind of tickle your creative funny bone. I know how passionate you are about filmmaking, so that kind of like gives you that outlet. The problem I have is I've got too much. Like if I showed you my to read pile, my to watch pile, and my ideas list, that's when the problem comes. It's like I've got all this free time, but what the hell do I start with?
Yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword for sure. So I do have some viewer questions as well. So Elaine asks, what are some of your favorite horror novels?
Ooh, good question, Elaine. Um, Obviously, like I say, I mentioned The Stand. I mentioned In the Mountains of Madness. Other horror novels that I've really enjoyed, though, probably from. I'm actually looking at my bookshelf now. I'm just kind of cheating by kind of I'm looking at it. It's like, oh yeah, there's that. There's an author called Jason Arnott, who UK-based author. He both his books actually absolutely phenomenal horrors. The Last Days of Jack Sparks and Ghoster. Now, Last Days of Jack Sparks is about a sleazy journalist who who investigates an exorcism, and it kind of changes his life. And Ghoster is about an experience a woman has with a guy she meets through Tinder. So both of those are absolutely fantastic. Other than that, the aforementioned Dane Cobain, No Rest for the Wicked, also kind of deals with that kind of like evil angel approach, and the battle for the soul of humanity. Um, there's so much good horror out there at the moment, and so much good horror that I've actually got to try and read at some stage. But yeah, those would be the primary ones I give the thumbs up to.
Awesome. So my mum has actually asked a question, Debbie Allard.
Oh,
So she's asked, are you afraid of the dark or hearing noises at night?
Debbie, you cut to the core of me. Um, I have a very creative imagination, so as a kid, yes, I was afraid of the dark, and I have one memory that is probably defining. So I had this Halloween mask. I think it was like an old man Halloween mask, and I put it on a chair in my bedroom, and just kind of forgot about it. until I kind of stirred in the middle of the night, and the problem was the light of the moon was on that, and that was facing a mirror, which was facing me. So I'm seeing this mirror with an illuminated face of an old man in a half sleepy state, and absolutely, yeah, that was an experience. But you kind of like nowadays. I mean, one wonderful symptom of my mental health is occasionally seeing like shadows, or you think you see shadows move. So you just kind of you get used to them, really. If there are demons out there, I'm hoping they'll at least put the kettle on before they ravage my soul.
Awesome. So I think that's all the viewer questions we have today.
Okay.
There was a couple more questions that you sent to me here. So one is from Matt Street. What is it about the town and your experiences there that inspired you to write Strange Days in High Wycombe?
Have you read Strange Days in High Wycombe?
Like several years ago now.
Then you'll know it's not the most positive probably view of Wycombe. There's a very interesting, and this was when I lived there as well. I've only recently left there after about 15, 16 odd years, probably longer in fact. But there are a lot of what happens in Stray Days at High Wycombe are experiences I had, and I wouldn't say the character of Guy is a reflection of me. It's kind of a combination of people I knew and experiences I had, and yeah, so I always call it semi-autobiographical because some of the experiences I can hold my hands up and say, yes, that happened to me. Other experiences are stuff that I witnessed, and like I say, the character of Guy is very much a composite character of people I met in Wycombe. So yeah, it's an interesting book. It's one that I had a lot of love for, and then there was a lot of backlash, and that made me kind of not love it anymore. So it's a weird one for me. At one stage I depublished it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting town because I went to university there as well, and went to
Mm.
university back when the university there was still called Buckinghamshire Chilterns University College, which is a mouthful.
UC represent.
Yeah, and like it's such a long name that, as you can hear, I had to take a breath halfway through saying it. But it's uh, when I was there, that was when they had the Soviet-style bus shelter. Um,
Oh God, yeah.
yeah, and it was listed as the worst building or the worst architectural building in the UK. And it was so infamous that it made it onto a documentary, a primetime documentary. Um,
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah.
so it's a different
A
town.
lot of horror scenarios were inspired by that bus shelter. Let me just tell you that now.
Yeah.
But yeah, calling it Soviet probably is being kind and being insulting to the very regimented industrial ideals of the Soviet Union. Bless them. Oh God, that was an awful building. So bad.
Yeah, it's
Like,
but I when I read Strange Days in High Wycombe, because I read it about 5 years ago now, because you gave me a copy when I came over in 2015.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and I read it shortly after that. It's very reminiscent to me of that duality of the town, that it has this
Mm,
really um, kind of dirty industrial history, and this
mm,
really forgotten era of like the bus shelter and the abandoned parking lot just across from the university. And then it went from that into being renovated in this really beautiful town. And it has this
mm.
duality of like being a wonderful town, but with very depressing architecture. Uh,
I think that almost kind of fits the theme of you kind of have like some of the characters in it are well, there's the characters which are nice, but they hold kind of terrible under habits, as it were, and then are the terrible people, such as the main character, who I like to think have hidden depths, maybe,
yeah,
yeah, in some respect. But yeah, let's call that a theme.
awesome. Um, and then my mum has responded here and said that was a good answer. I wonder if the feelings you had as a child with the mask is what you try to recreate for readers with your books.
Um, I like to terrify my readers. I think any any horror writer will tell you if you terrify a reader, then you've succeeded as an author, or in my case, made them laugh as well, or done both at the same time. Always a blessing. So yeah, it's kind of a lot of the horror that I write is also based on my own idea of fear, and what is scary. So like I say, a lot of it. I'm a big fan of cosmic horror, obviously with being a fan of Lovecraft, so the unknown and things beyond comprehension. Like House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski is another horror book that I love. Although, is it a horror book? Is it it's a weird book. I don't know. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't actually.
I Right, look it up, but be prepared.
Okay.
Is honestly what I can say, because it is a head mess of a book, but it is wonderful once you get it.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, this has been a really wonderful experience, Ollie, and thank you for joining me today.
Ah,
And
it's always a pleasure. We will have to do this again sometime.
yeah, for sure. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you for tuning in, asking such wonderful questions. And we will see you all soon. My next interview will be with Jesse Pine, an author from right here in Saskatoon. So thanks again.
Awesome.
See you soon.
Like, share, subscribe.